keep on running. I keep on running. I keep on running. Running. Non-stop till they out of breath. Putting in about 1,000 reps. Addicted to the grind like a pound of meth. Schneider-Weiler, how I climb the best.
Welcome to the Football Autobiography Show. It is such a pleasure to be with you all today, wherever in the world you are listening. The Football Autobiography Show is dedicated to taking you on a football journey with football's most interesting players, coaches, trainers, staff, and journalists. Think of these as mini football autobiographies. Each guest will show you how they got where they are now, reveal their techniques for success, and what they've learned along the way. Our guest today is Gwendolyn Oxenham, author of Finding the Game, 3 Years, 25 Countries, and the Search for Pickup Soccer, and the co-director of Pelada, a documentary that the book is based off of. We discussed the movie and international street football at great length in part 1 of the interview, and Oxenham has also written for the Atlantic and MLSsoccer and is currently an English professor at the Laguna College of Art and Design. She is also the author of the new book, Under the Lights and in the Dark, Inside Women's Soccer, which is in bookstores now and which I have a link to in my show notes. We discussed this in the second part of the interview. That book is a collection of the most interesting short stories in women's football, most of which have never been told before. I won't pretend to be a massive women's football fan, but the book makes it very accessible for any football fan, regardless of whether you're a women's fan or a men's fan. The love and determination of the subjects is truly astounding in the book, and in our episode, she discusses these fascinating stories, including a homeless English national team player, the emotional journey of one Nigerian player, and the discrimination pregnant mothers face off in the game, and much, much more. And of course, we go into Oxenham's backstory and why she decided to write this book. Take a listen and enjoy my conversation with Gwendolyn Oxenham. I am talking with Gwendolyn Oxenham. It's such a pleasure to be with you here today. Thanks for coming on the show.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
So before we get into your various books and your documentary, can you just tell the audience where you grew up and a little bit about your childhood?
Sure. So I'm from Pensacola, Florida, which is not necessarily a hotbed of soccer talent. Pensacola is very different from the Florida most people imagine when they think of Florida. We're more like Alabama in style. And I grew up playing on a team that we had a Trinidadian who he got us all when we were like 7 years old, and he raised all of us all the way through and got us full scholarships, or not necessarily full, but big scholarships to schools we wouldn't have otherwise been able to go to. And just if you played soccer and you were serious about it, you played for him, and he basically changed all of our lives. But Pensacola was, it's a little beach town, redneck style, and it was a great place to grow up. There was also a lot of guys who played in the area, so I grew up playing a lot of pickup. That's all we did all day long during the summer was do 1v1s and pickup games at night and run. It was great.
And so, how did you get into soccer? What initially drew you to it, or how old were you when you first got involved?
Sure. I was in ballet, actually. I was 8 years old and so bad I was in the 3 and 4-year-old class. That is not an exaggeration. I mean, that is truth. I was really awkward. And my brother was playing soccer. And as soon as I saw him playing, I said, Dad, I want to play soccer. And so my first team was the Candy Canes, and I loved it. I was a little bit of a timid sort of player, and my dad was always like, be more fierce, and that took a long time before that happened. But I just loved it, right? And, I was very much a flailer, awkward sort. And in soccer, I felt like I could make that work for me almost. So it didn't matter that I wasn't graceful at soccer. I could just try and hustle. So.
And so was your brother older than you?
No, he was actually younger. And, he was starting at, I guess he was probably 6. And so I was 7.5 or 8. And I saw him out there and thought, well, what the heck? This is way more my style than ballet. So that prompted the switch.
And so at what point did you realize that you were exceptionally good and that you could go play college ball?
I guess, I don't think of it in that terms. I think of it, I wanted everything. And when I was 12 years old, I tried out for the Florida Olympic Development Program. And I was a diehard. I had a T-shirt that said, if you don't practice, you don't deserve to dream. And since I did practice, I therefore thought I deserved to dream. And so I was totally crushed when I tried out for this team and I didn't make it. And I just remember them calling out the numbers and they just skipped right over mine. And even after they skipped by my number, I was still convinced they were going to call my number somehow. And when I didn't make it, that was the moment where I thought, they're wrong. I had a coach tell me I was, once again, too awkward for that level. And so then I just spent the next year. I played on my club team. I played with I called the high school and asked if I could train with them, and they let me. And then I played with my brother's team. So I went to at least 2 practices a day. And then, they had told us about how, at the tryout, they told us about how Michael Jordan got cut from his team and he just played on his own. And I was very much the kid who, I knew about Rocky and all of the inspirational Pistol Pete style movies. So I would drag the trash cans into the street and I'd dribble around them for 30 minutes every day, no matter what, no matter how many practices I had already had. And so I just was so determined to show them I didn't suck, that I was better than they thought I was. And so that the next year I tried out for the team again and I made it. And then every year after that, I would make one level further than I'd made before. And so I never thought of myself as good. I can play college. I just thought of myself as one day I was going to be good, maybe. So that was the plan. And I don't know if you ever. I don't know. I never thought of myself as good. I just thought of it as this was the one thing I knew how to do and the one thing that I absolutely loved. Except I also loved reading and writing. So those were I was tremendously socially inept. So the soccer field was my relief. I mean, I could just go and play. And I played on this girls' club team and they were all older than me and they were kind of my heroes. And so they were all graceful and beautiful and smart. And I just wanted to be just like them. So the field was just like my refuge.
That's incredible that you were that driven. You were the youngest Division I athlete in history, as far as I know. You played for Duke at the age of 16. How did you end up being an NCAA athlete so early, or at such a young age, rather?
Yeah, it goes back to the socially awkward thing where high school was not super fun for me, and my club teammates were all older than I was, so they were all graduating, and so if I would have stayed, I would have had no one left to play with. And then I had started school when I was 4, so I was already young for my age. So my coach just called me and said, I want to retire. Could you just leave early? And I was like, yes, I would love to do that, actually. And so it just worked out, and I just happened to be young anyway. And, when you're that young, you're too young to notice that you're young. And I was much more cocky at that age than I was there on out. So I think that my youth actually worked in my favor in that, I was I was too young to have self-doubt. So that was the age where I thought I could do anything.
And so eventually you played all 4 years at Duke, and then explain your ideas going forward when you were finishing your soccer career, when you were leaving Duke. What were you considering as career paths, and in regards to soccer and otherwise?
Career paths. Do English majors ever think about career paths? I don't know. I knew I wanted to play. But I also knew that women's professional soccer, the league was tenuous at best. And then when my senior year, the league folded. So there was no pro league for me to play in. I knew I wanted to. Reading. I loved reading as much as I loved playing. So I had this idea that I wanted to write. I'd been taking writing classes and documentary studies classes. And so I applied to 2 creative writing schools, and I got rejected right away from one. And then Notre Dame, I didn't hear from them for months. And so I just assumed that they got so many applications, they didn't have time to notify everyone who'd been rejected. And then I got in, and I was really surprised and happy. And I just thought, okay, maybe I can transfer all this effort I put into soccer into writing. And I definitely had some athlete's insecurity, though, where the only reason why I was good at soccer was because I'd spent thousands of hours dribbling around cones. And so then when I had to go enter a completely new arena and subject, I didn't have any confidence because, while everyone else was out reading Moby Dick, I was dribbling around cones. So it was also, super exciting and interesting after having been an athlete who really spent every second playing to then have this completely new life and world to enter into where, creative writing grad school, there's like 10 of you, everyone wears black, everyone's a vegan, everyone, it was just such a different world than my athlete experience. And I really enjoyed it.
And so how did you go from there to making Pelada, the documentary Pelada?
Yeah, so I was sitting in South Bend, Indiana, freezing cold, and I had lived by myself in this little apartment, and I'd sit by my space heater and I'd write, and I got this email saying Santos looking for American goal scorer, and it was right before summer, and I was in total soccer withdrawal. I missed it so much, and the idea of playing for Santos, Pelé, Neymar. Neymar hadn't played there yet, but Robinho was there at the time, and just I couldn't pass up that chance. And I think any soccer player grows up hearing about Brazil. Brazil's that magical football spot, and so the chance to go there, I couldn't turn it down, even though they weren't paying me anything. I had to buy my own plane ticket out there, but just the chance to experience that football culture, I couldn't pass up. So I went to Santos and played for a summer. And so the summer before I went to grad school, I got a job working as a deckhand on a $15 million yacht stationed near Mexico. And I was the toilet scrubber. And so I would just scrub toilets all day. But then we were anchored off this island that serves as an outpost for the Mexican army. And it's basically where all the bad soldiers get sent because it's really remote and buggy, and nobody wants to get stationed there, according to Alfredo, the guy I was working with. And so we could see these soldiers from our boat, and they've got giant machine guns and machetes, and they're intimidating looking. But right behind them is a makeshift soccer field with driftwood goalposts. And having not played for so long, I had to go over there. So even though Alfredo was like, "Don't do it, don't go over there. Those are the bad soldiers," I made kicking gestures. I dinghied over there, and within 10 minutes, I'm playing in this amazing pickup game in monsoon rain, and where it's just that wild laughter sort of game. And at the end of the game, I'm taking pictures where I'm literally holding their machine guns in the picture. And the way that soccer could do that, I just thought was so awesome. And you hear so much about David Beckham and the pro leagues and Real Madrid, but no one ever focused on these back alley games. And I thought they were such a connector. I thought, I mean, you could go from being this American tourist girl and a scary soldier to just friends. I mean, immediately just by playing, you get to know people in a way that you can't if you don't play. And that concept stuck with me. So I never forgot that game. And I had done documentary studies in college. So always it just sort of rattled around in the back of my brain, this pickup game I played in. And once I got done with graduate school for creative writing, I was back at Duke with one of my former teammates, and we just spent a late night in the library with a legal pad out thinking, like, what would we do if we could do anything? And that Mexico game that I played in was the root of it, where we just figured that probably all over the world there were pickup games like this that and it's just where you can really see the full spectrum of race, gender, class, everything. So we just decided to go hunt for games, and I called up my old documentary studies camera partner, who was a stud behind the camera and just had a really great vision. And we just got the four of us and set out, and that became Pelada.
Yeah, I mean, it for anyone who hasn't seen it, it's an incredible movie. It's been 7 years now, I believe, since it came out. So you've had a lot of time to reflect on those experiences, and I mean, I believe it took 3 years to film. So now that it's been a while, what are some of the moments or experiences that you had in those 3 years that stay with you and that you think about, maybe not daily but weekly?
Yeah. I mean, the one that obviously comes to mind is our game in Kenya. We played in the largest and oldest slum in Africa, Mathare Valley. And we played on a field that used to be a garbage dump. And the garbage still sort of rises out of the ground. And they on Saturdays, they'll have a tournament and you bet shillings on the game. And, by playing in the tournament, it means you don't make your day's wages. But if you win, you can win it all back. And the stakes were ridiculously high. But that community, the poverty was incredible. There was a day where we weren't filming. The cameras we had left behind. We were just playing with these two guys. They're Kefa and Bonfas. We were playing with their team, and to get there, you walk along the open trench that is kind of the makeshift sewer. And I, being a girl, had to go change in a shack. So they sent me to change, and while I'm changing, I fell, and my hand landed in human feces. I didn't want to be the American who comes out and is like, "Excuse me, I need to wash my hands," especially because I knew that the one water spigot, the only access to water, was a 20-minute walk away. So, I just had to brush it off and keep going. And then after we played, it was pouring rain, and the trenches were overflowing. So I kept falling. So every second I'm falling into these, right next to the open sewers, and I can't stay on my feet. It's so slippery. It's just pure mud. And, and I'm sort of, speechless by all of this, but that at the same time, I'm passing grandmas who do this walk every single day. And, that it was just, I can't, you don't ever stop thinking about that place. And the Kenyans that we met were so inspiring in terms of just hope and willpower and what they were able to achieve and how much they've done for their community and the kids. And, they have made a field for the kids to play. And it's the only thing to do. And so through football, they've been able to just make major strides in their community. And that country, that's the one that I think about the most. But the whole world was ridiculously inspiring. I mean, we played with 80-year-olds in Brazil who beat the hell out of each other every morning and talk trash, and just seeing how much the game meant to them at the end of their career, or way past their career. It just the lesson that, it doesn't matter how old you are or whether there's a coach watching or anyone who cares. Like as long as there's someone waiting for you at the field, counting on you to play well, the game matters just as much at the end of your life as it did when you thought, you could be the best. So that was an awesome lesson to learn. I think that was the real lesson that I walked away with. And just all over the world, I mean, you care and you try, and it doesn't matter if you're playing pro or not. As long as you try hard, it will always be just as fun and just as meaningful.
And so you went to a lot of dangerous places when you were on your travels. You went to prisons and all sorts. What did you ever feel scared? And if so, when? Yeah.
The Bolivian prison is the one where people sort of assume would be the scariest. But the prison was so bizarre in the sense that, it was their own world where the prisoners were actually in charge. And so we had prisoners who were kind of watching out for our welfare, where sure, there was a lot of adrenaline as we were playing in games with, guys who were in for murder. And that was awesome because the intensity level of the game was so high. When you're in prison, all there was to do was play football. So it was one of the highest level we played in. So I ended up being more nervous about being good enough than I was about who I was playing against. But the actual, probably where I was most nervous was in Brazil. We played in the favelas, which, are the kind of the ghettos run by teenage drug lords. And there was one moment where in order to go in, you have to get permission from the drug lords. So we had two guys who had agreed to take us in. And so we get there to the favela, and we're early because we don't want to be late. So then we're just 4 American tourists hanging outside the favela. And favelas have higher crime rates than most war zones. So, we were aware of that. And when I had lived in Brazil before, I saw a dead body on my first day there. Luke, my husband, who was there, then he was my boyfriend, he'd been held up at gunpoint when he was in Brazil. His 2 friends who visited him both got robbed. Brazil has its fair share of crime. And so I'm very aware of this as we're standing outside the favela. And then when the guys come pick us up, one of them starts whistling the theme song from Kill Bill as we walk in. And that was just really creepy. So as we're walking into this marvelous, it's so beautiful in its own way. It looks like just pastel Jenga blocks on a hillside. And there's this 15-year-old, and he's propped up on his machine gun. As it reminded me of those pictures where people would prop themselves up on umbrellas in the olden days. And so he's just sitting on his machine gun with his hands, and I swear he's looking at me, but I also don't want to make eye contact with the gunman. But then I hear him say in perfect English, Hello, my friends. Welcome to Rocinha, the most beautiful place on earth. Meanwhile, the Kill Bill is still being whistled, and it's just that was it was an intense moment. That being said, we got into Marvel. It's kind of shocking how little of trouble we had. How we never really got in trouble. Where we went into Argentina's ghettos without any sort of permission from any drug lords, and that felt dangerous for sure. We had 4 different policemen try to turn us around. But I think that when you have soccer, it was like we had friends wherever we went, and they wanted to show us their community, and they wanted to tell their story, and that I think made a difference. And maybe we were just naive enough to not and got lucky. I don't know, but I think soccer really, once you had the ball and once you had players from within the community, it really kept us safe. The only time we got robbed was in the rich part of Argentina on a subway. So,
that's ironic. Yeah.
Yeah.
It seems like the soccer was just very disarming to people that you met. Have you done any traveling since then? So now we've got 2 kids, and that certainly limits the travel. But right before I had my first son, I actually went with the U.S. State Department. They sent me to Turkmenistan to talk about sports because they were about to do the Asia Cup, and they were really trying to get really geared up for this Asian Cup. And Turkmenistan was crazy because it's not westernized at all, and I knew almost nothing going into Turkmenistan. And when I got there, I got to play. I was in my hotel, and I wanted to go see I wanted to go find a pickup game. And so I went and looked for a pickup game, which was really interesting because I don't think they had ever seen a woman play before at all. I don't think women play at all in Turkmenistan. And, we had traveled for the movie and the playing pickup, but I always had Luke with me. And also, there were cameras around, and you never know how cameras affect a dynamic. So I was really excited to just go out on my own and see. And, it was the same. It was absolutely the same, where you do one stupid step over or scissors move, and people freaked out. But Turkmenistan was a really interesting experience. They've got a dictator, and I went to the Ministry of Sports, and there in every single room, there was a picture of the dictator doing that sport. So him playing badminton, him playing water polo, and I also managed to ride a mechanical horse while I was in Turkmenistan. And just while you're bucking in the air in Turkmenistan, I was just like, wow, you never know where you're going to end up. So, yeah, like how did I get here? But
exactly.
I'm curious. How successful were you at when you were approaching these games at, getting in them? Like, what was your success rate?
Pretty much always. Luke always talks about when he lived in Brazil and he would try to get in pickup games, or peladas as they call them there. They'd see this blonde gringo and would make him play goalkeeper, and then he would have to prove his way out of goal. And certainly as a girl, it's even more so. They're like, they just expect you to be bad, but then it's really easy to impress. And so, all over the world, what we found was as soon as I could establish that I loved the same game they did and could play, people were completely accepting and embracing, and were into it. That was our experience. I can't imagine it's always like that. But for us, it was. I mean, each place has its own rules, and you have to wait your turn, and you've got to. I mean, in Buenos Aires, you have to pay to rent a court, and in some of the places that we played, and those are situations where, I mean, if you're paying money to be there, no one's going to give up their spot so that you could play. But that was just the way it worked. It wasn't like a matter of us not getting into the game. So, I mean, we held up a ball, we mumbled some words in whatever language we were in, and we had a game. It was almost all of the time.
Okay. I mean, I'm really happy that it was so successful. I was a little surprised because I thought it would be a little bit more difficult.
In London, it was London was one of the more difficult spots, I would say. I mean, I guess there was one game in London where there were some Iraqi immigrants who didn't want to play with a woman for religious reasons. Like I couldn't. It was against their religion to like brush up against me, maybe. But that was the only stumbling block. And we played with other Iraqi immigrants who were awesome, who had no problem with me playing.
And so after the whole Pelada experience, obviously it took 3 years to do, and then you had the actual editing and then release of the movie. After that was finished, how did that translate or give you impetus to write more about soccer and then come out with your most recent book, Under the Lights and In the Dark?
Yeah, so I wrote my first book, Finding the Game, which was kind of the travel memoir and all the stories behind the film. And after that, I'm an English instructor at some local colleges here, and so I was teaching and writing, and I actually didn't want to write another word about soccer. I wanted to write about something else, and so I was in the middle of a fiction book that does not have the word soccer in it when I got, contacted about writing this book, and I wasn't sure that I wanted to write about soccer, but then once I started finding these stories, I was blown away by these inspiring stories, and a lot of them were just shocking. And so I feel so lucky to be able to tell the stories of these players who have pretty much, what they were willing to go through in order to keep playing was really powerful to me. And then I stayed in the soccer world too, writing an article here and there anytime I found a story I thought was cool. But I, for the most part, I'm an English teacher I teach short stories and novels that aren't that sportsy. I teach at an art school where, my students literally do not know who Messi is.
Wait, so I'm curious. You said someone contacted you. Who contacted you, and did they pitch you exactly what this book would be, or what was that like?
No, Icon Books, a publisher in England. They wanted to do something in relation to women's soccer. They had noticed that there wasn't a book about women's soccer on a global scale, and they had seen some of the articles I had written, and so they asked me if there was anything I would be interested in writing. And I had always been fascinated by the global element, and I had a sense of what it was like to play women's soccer in the United States, but I had no idea what it was like to be a professional soccer player in Nigeria as a woman, or Thailand, or I'd watch the World Cup and I didn't know anything about their lives. And so I was curious to go find out, to go kind of on a scavenger hunt for stories and see what I could find.
And how did you find those stories? Because there are just so many incredible different ones in there. How did you get them all? It
was similar to Pelada almost, where you'd hear a little tip. So, Pelada, we heard that there were Mennonites who played in the middle of the Bolivian jungle. So then we went to the Bolivian jungle to go find the Mennonites, and actually found they were like, no, actually we don't play ball here. And so it was a little bit like that, like a wild goose chase, where I would hear some tip. I mean, for Russia, I heard that the Russian Women's Pro League was really insane, and that the mafia was somehow involved. And I had a player tell me that her friend, when she played, they'd be asked to carry bags and they wouldn't know what was in the bags. And so then I would go investigate and try to find who had said that and whether that was true or not. And so I'd talk to one player who played in Russia, who would refer me to another player. And then I knew that I wanted to talk to an African player, because I had never heard an in-depth story on what it was like to play women's soccer anywhere in Africa. And so I went to Wikipedia and was looking at the Nigerian roster, and I noticed that one of the players had an American flag next to it for their club team, and she was a college player, and her name was Courtney DK. And just by coincidence, her brother had played at Notre Dame, which is where Luke, my husband, played. And so I contacted her brother, who helped me get in touch with her. And then when I talked to Courtney, she helped me get in touch with another one of her teammates on the Nigerian team. And so it was just through players who knew other players who knew other players, I would eventually stumble on a story. So, and I mean, somebody like Nadia Nadim, I had read a lot of articles about her incredible story. Her father was executed by the Taliban, and she learned how to play in refugee camp in Denmark. And I had heard a couple page articles about that, but I really wanted to know what that looked like and what the full story was. So it was just a mix of hearing about little stories and just trying to talk to players and going from there.
Well, I want to get into some of those really interesting stories, but before we do, how long did it take to write? Because it seems like, because there's just so many different stories. It seems like this was like a 2-3 year process, just like Pelada.
Yeah, it was. It was it was intense, because I had a 2 and 3 year old, and I was pregnant, and then I had a newborn. So I don't recommend writing a book with a newborn who was waking up every hour at night. But it, the stories, I was just so into them. The stories were so inspiring that it was a blur. I don't know how long it took. I think I was writing for a couple of years. Yeah. And much more so towards the end. The first year, I've still got a whole year before this thing is done. And then all of a sudden, you're in the harder stretch. But, they really felt almost like they wrote themselves, because the players, they all, had such, there was so much material that it poured out of me.
And so which stories were the most powerful to you? Obviously it's hard to choose, but which ones come to mind first? I guess it's a cop out to say I can't pick. But I know the Russia story is insane. In my first page of the Russia chapter, Danny Foxov, an American, she goes over, she sits down on the grass, and the coach comes over and slaps her in the face and picks her up by the ear. And that's, week 1 of her experience in Russia, and it doesn't get any less gnarly from there on out. So I think Russia was the most eyebrow raising. But I honestly, every single chapter, Farrah Williams, she was homeless while she was playing on the English national team. And she has a friendship with a homeless teenager who she took under her wing, and writing about that friendship and what Farrah has meant to this teenager.
was one that got to me personally. The Comeback Moms chapter, you hear a lot about these amazing athletes who are also mothers. But one element that I don't think people really talk about is sort of the kind of discrimination that they face, where I follow 4 different mothers who all were basically cut or traded after announcing their pregnancy. And that I hadn't really been aware of, when I was a kid, I remember watching Carla Overback and Joey Fawcett and, Rick Riley of Sports Illustrated would write about the diaper bags on the sideline. And so I just thought it was went very much hand in hand. And I didn't realize kind of the judgment. I mean, people assume once you have a kid that your priorities change, and it's such a risk because your body goes under such a dramatic physical transformation. And so I guess there's some doubt about mothers able to come back, at least in the case of these 4 mothers. And then each player came back stronger and faster and had more success on the field post-pregnancy than they did beforehand. And that was really cool and motivating to me. The story of the Nigerian player, she grew up in a place where there wasn't enough space to turn over at night. They slept on the floor, and via football, she was able to completely transform the lives of her family. I mean, even though they're making very, very minimal salaries as a professional Nigerian football player, it was still enough to just change her life completely. And there's a scene that gets to me where she has spent 10 years, it might have been less than 10 years, but it was a long time, saving up to build her mother a house. And she built it little by little. And her mother never got emotional until they went furniture shopping, and her mother sat down on a couch and just started bawling because she'd never sat down on a couch before. And she says something like, I've never sat on a piece of furniture like this. I never thought this would happen in my lifetime. Like, if I'm dreaming, please God, don't let me wake up. And just the way that soccer changed, I mean, what Alinka was able to do for her family. And yet she's still in the throes of it. I mean, she's in Sweden right now. Her knee's bothering her. She was playing on a top team, and now she's in a Division III team. And she's just terrified of returning to the poverty that she spent her whole life fleeing. Because women's soccer, there is so much inequality, and because it's been ignored for so long, there was just insane stories that grew out of that, those circumstances.
Yeah, no, I was absolutely floored when I was reading that scene where she's in the furniture shop, and I loved how you continued on that story because at that moment I didn't know how much more there was to the story, and then she talks about going to the United States and it was a dream come true, and I was just blown away by how. And then she was brought back down to earth in Sweden again, and the topsy-turvy element was really striking. Did you the women in this book? It's amazing the lengths they go to play professionally. Did their effort ever surprise you, and just say like I can't believe that you're keep on pursuing this?
I don't know if surprise would be the right word, but certainly motivated and inspired by it, and moved by it. I mean, that to me is what's so cool about women's soccer. I mean, if you're looking for the beautiful elements of sport, nowhere is it more present than the women's game, because these are athletes who are not in it for fame or money at all. Like, they are playing simply because they love it too much to stop, or where they will go through anything pretty much in order to keep playing, whether that's, abusive coaches people forcing them to do steroids against their will. I mean, the some of the circumstances are really depressing, what they've experienced, and yet they've risen out of those circumstances. And that was my, that why I wanted to write the book.
Did it inspire you to consider maybe trying to go pro, even though it's been many years since you played for Santos?
Well, no, because I'm old now, and they're realistically, I did not. However, I am going to be playing in the equally important Beer City Cup in Asheville, which is the largest amateur adult tournament in the U.S., and cash prizes, craft beer, and I'm really excited to try hard again. That was my favorite part about playing, was just trying as hard as you can. And so having a cash prize, I mean, I'm not in it for the cash, but having an actual tangible thing to play for sounds really fun to me, and definitely their stories motivated me to keep going. I mean, even writing the book, I was, it's having babysitters and knowing you're spending $15 an hour every time you're writing, and not sleeping at night. It was hard, but I was writing about these women who had achieved the impossible. So it was certainly motivating to keep writing then.
Is there anything in the book that you didn't get to put but that maybe you'd like to share now?
I'm not. I know that Lori Lindsay worked for Auntie Anne's Pretzels while she was trying to be on the women's national team, and that was a cool factoid that didn't make it in. And there were similar little factoids that didn't make it in. And I really wanted to go do in-depth stories, and I had more access in some places than others, and there were language barriers. So while I would have loved to have an in-depth story on a German player, I just was never able to get that access. So the Netherlands, the Dutch just won Women's Euros, and I didn't have a Dutch story in there, and that bummed me out. But I even when I didn't get a full story, I tried to find a way to incorporate a little nugget in. Oh, here's one for you. Jennifer. I don't know her last name. One of the best German players, Morrison, Jennifer. I would have to look it up, so I don't. Her dad played professionally, and she ended up playing for the same team her father did, and she told a cool story about when she first stepped on the field. Her dad, couldn't say anything because he was choked up with pride, watching his daughter play. And that was just one little story I never found a home for. So there were just little stories like that didn't quite make it in.
That's incredible. What is something that I don't want to say, I guess, what is something that you noticed in a lot of the stories that was present throughout a lot of these stories in women's football?
Having nothing. I mean, no money, but not even caring. I mean, you care, but the through line was simple. They found the game at an early age, and they held on. I mean, they followed the game wherever it took them, no matter what.
Is there an issue that a lot of the women talk about in terms of tackling, or just a hot button issue that is going on in a lot of these women's locker rooms at the moment?
I mean, making people care, finding an audience. The national teams have found that. I mean, we're kind of at this amazing point in women's football where, in 1999 in the U.S., we hit a tipping point where we filled Rose Bowl Stadium and every 12-year-old girl was watching, and soccer took off in the U.S. In the women's game. And now it feels like the entire world is having similar experiences where the whole country is getting on board for the national team. But how you figure out how to make that interest translate into the pro leagues, where it's not quite as star-studded and where you've got to get butts in the seat once a week, that's really hard. So, I mean, most of these athletes are very familiar with playing in empty stadiums with very few fans, and the fans who are there are really passionate and really see it as a chance for change, and they see what's so inspiring about the women playing. But how you build that, how you make people want to watch, how you get them to know the league exists. I mean, it's so much of a chicken and an egg situation where there's no money for advertising. So then there aren't big commercials, and then no one knows about the league. And so then it's hard to attract sponsors. But when you don't attract sponsors, then you don't have the ads. And so just figuring that out. I mean, and any time a pro league has started, it takes a long time to build a base, whether men or women are playing. And so I think that all around the world, the women's pro leagues are trying to figure out how to build in the future. And that's, I think, our generation's big question is how you make a women's pro league succeed financially, and attract the attention of the general mainstream public.
I'm curious. You mentioned you were in the midway through a fiction book before you started doing this most recent book. What was the idea or the theme of the fiction book you were writing, and which do you prefer, writing fiction or nonfiction?
Well, let's see. I prefer reading fiction. I'm a big reader. So I had always intended to write fiction, but then I just ended up writing nonfiction. My book that I was working on, I lived in New Orleans when I was a kid, and my parents were separated, and I was with my dad, and my dad would take me to this bar where there was a jukebox, and I had these pink and white Oxfords, and I would dance in front of the jukebox. And there was a night where I was dancing on the dock, and I accidentally knocked into a drunk guy, and he fell off the dock. And in real life, that he was fine, but in the fiction book, I had a friend who was paralyzed from falling off a dock. And so in the fiction book, he dies. And so this 8-year-old has accidentally killed a man. And then that's kind of the start of the story. And then she ends up like being a fortune teller / bullshitter. And, that's the story. And it's so much fun to write. And I have no idea whether it'll ever see the light of day, but, it's so much fun. I have a great time writing it, which is usually a good sign. It's so different to me though. Nonfiction and fiction. I mean, there's a lot that's similar in that whether you're writing nonfiction or fiction, you're trying to find a way to create suspense, to have characters people care about. But fiction, I get to just make it all up, while nonfiction, there's the responsibility of doing these people's story justice, and you taking the details that you do have and making them add up to something. It seems harder to me, not nonfiction, because I want it to have the same pull and sway of fiction, but you have real truth, to facts that you have to work with. So that seems trickier to me.
It's interesting because you obviously have such a love for fiction and for non-sports or non-soccer related writing, but at the same time, clearly, obviously have such a passion for soccer. Do you anticipate, doing a lot more soccer related books or documentaries in the future, or do you see yourself going more towards non-soccer related topics?
I'm passionate about the game and always will be. It gave me everything I have. And so any stories that rise up out of that, I will always want to follow. So I like to chase stories, and because soccer is my home and my niche, I think I'll always tell soccer stories. But I want to finish this New Orleans book too, and I definitely like the idea of writing outside of the game too. But if a story is good, whether there's soccer or no soccer, I love the chance to follow it.
All right, so I want to get into some more personal questions. So, what if you wrote an autobiography? What would you name it?
Oh gosh. Has-beens. I actually was writing an autobiography, and when I was in grad school, my brother was going to prison while I was going to grad school, and it was kind of, has-beens worked for my soccer career, and that I was a washed-up, retired 20-year-old soccer player, but then my brother was a has-been in the sense that, he had a record, and, we both had these pasts and that affect your future. So I guess has-beens would be what I would go with for the autobiography name.
What is your favorite book?
My favorite book right now, I would say it's All the Light We Cannot See. But A River Runs Through It was really important to me when I was younger.
Why was that really important to you?
I'm a sucker for sibling stories, obviously, and it was the story of two brothers, and then there was a sport in the background, fly fishing, and so it just really resonated with me, the story of this older brother writing about his younger brother and the trouble that his younger brother was in, but also like what his brother was so beautiful at, and that just really, really resonated with me with my own brother's story. So that was one of my first really impactful books. I'm obsessed with Junot Diaz, David Foster Wallace. I love his nonfiction and his essays. Joan Didion. Let's see. Jesus' Son by Dennis Johnson was a game changer for me. So I teach English, so I do a lot of, I get to throw my favorite short stories at my students and then make them love it as much as I do, and that's really fun.
Is there any soccer writer that you admire, or you always make sure that you're reading their work?
Yeah, Grant Wall obviously is such the women's soccer he does an amazing job with, as well as men's soccer. And then Wright Thompson, I love Wright Thompson's work. So I guess those two have been my go-tos. Simon Cooper, and I mean, obviously I read Fever Pitch by Nick Hornby when I was, in the throes of it. So, yeah.
Where do you see yourself in 5 years or 30 years?
Wow. In 5 years, where would I see myself? Hopefully not that different from where I am right now. I hopefully will have my New Orleans book done, and we'll just continue to be able to write and read and hang out with my sons and husband. So, but also adventure. Like, I hope that, in 5 years, my boys will be old enough to drag them along on some wild adventure in some random place. And I certainly hope, the traveling has subsided a little bit right now, and the wanderlust has been building back up. So I'd love to have another adventure right around 5 years from now. As far as 30 years from now, I'd be so interested to see if I was still playing. The Brazilians we played with who were still playing at such an old age were really inspiring. And we play with some Persian guys in a Tuesday night pickup game, and there are a lot of older guys who are still playing, and I would love to imagine that I would still be playing for fun and for health, and just writing and teaching. I love it. I feel really lucky to have found what I love. I love to write, and I love to teach, and I love to play.
Do you have any special requests for the audience?
Special requests for the audience. I'd love for them to check out the stories of these players and to tell other people about the book. It's hard to get the word out there. So if the stories mean something to them, I would really appreciate if they could help spread the news of the book around so that these players' stories can have a larger audience. And I would request for them to watch women's soccer because it's really, the level is really, really high.
And how can fans connect with you?
I'm trying to learn this social media world. I do have a Twitter handle. Is that how you call it?
Yeah, Twitter handle, yeah.
Gwen Oxenham is my Twitter handle. I think I said that right. And I'm trying to actually pay attention to Twitter. And then I'm on Facebook, and I think that those are the best ways to connect.
Yeah, and I'll put those on the show notes so people can find you, and I'll also throw in your website as well.
Awesome.
And thank you for coming on the show. It's been a real pleasure talking with you.
Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.